This is one of the last parallel sessions before the roundtable discussion and the closing session. Speaking of the subject matter of this parallel session is the past 1.5 years sharply transformed how we live, how we interact, and how we experience the environment. And no doubt, at the very center of this unexpected change is the real estate sector. And arguably, we can no longer expect to return to our old practices, and real estate business will be affected from this. To further argue these issues in the context of the real estate sector, we have 4 distinguished speakers today. First, Professor Katie Payne from University of Reading, a professor of real estate and development, and Mr. Mahir Mermer, National Director of the JLL Turkey Real Estate Consulting, Mr. Erkan Sümer, Deputy General Manager of the Harmoni Real Estate and Consulting, and Professor Ali Türel from Çankaya University. I want to start with Professor Payne first, and Professor will be sharing with us her presentation, referring to findings from her research conducted with global real estate industry actors before the COVID in 2018 and during the COVID in 2021. Professor?
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, especially since I haven't been to Turkey or Istanbul for at least 2 years because of COVID-19. So I'm going to be talking today about real estate in times of COVID-19 in terms of behavioural shift. So you can see that as well as being Professor of Real Estate Development at the Henley Business School, Reading, I'm also the Director of Global City Planning in the Globalisation and World Cities Research Network. And we do monitoring of how the office occupiers are changing their locations around the world. We've been doing this since the year 2000. So that's where my research connects with this subject. I'm just having trouble moving my slides forward for some reason. There we go. So what has changed in the period since COVID? Well, this slide shows the publication which I wrote on the idea of the homogenization of global city real estate space in 2010. And as you can see, there was still the dynamic of crowding of all sorts of office users and investors into very similar cities, global cities around the world. So in terms of the financial crisis, work that I did for a European research project on that subject showed that resilience matters. And what we actually saw during that period was a flight of investment to safe haven destinations. And that meant a flight to investments in the European cities, including London in particular. So these 2 images show the safe haven in the top left-hand of the screen, which is where capital flows were going to in that period. And at the bottom, you can see the returns on real estate investment in that period. So what you can see from this is in 2016, is that actually the returns on investment were located in the same cities that the real estate capital flows were going to, but in others as well. And often those were secondary cities. So it was very much a safe haven kind of strategy. That was the behavioural reaction to financial crisis. Then another piece of research, which I did later in 2018, we were looking for the Urban Land Institute at the climate crisis, where environmental sustainability goals were beginning to matter. And you can see here from this screen what the statistics are behind that interest on the part of the real estate industry, investors in particular, with global economic output being concentrated in highly urbanized city regions, but the consumption of 70% of global energy in those same places, and emissions of 71 to 76% also in those cities with the very dense real estate markets. So therefore, that was exciting interest in the real estate industry, particularly the investment sector. So this was the project where I was studying that phenomenon, and the investors who were supporting the research had a vision. They were looking for a sweet spot, where to find good density. So you can see it in the middle of the figure to the left there. And there was this idea that if you could overlap cities with high investment returns, cities with low carbon emissions, and urban form, dense urban form conducive to livability, you would get this sweet spot of good density where you would get a better return on investment as well as livability and the lower emissions. So this is a slide just showing one of the results from this. There were many, and there's a long report displaying the results. But basically what we found here was that higher density equals higher investment returns, and higher density equals lower carbon emissions per person per square kilometre. So you can see some quite impressive results here on the screen. Hong Kong right up there at the top in terms of return on commercial real estate investment, very high density and low emissions. So this is what the funders said. They came to the conclusion, the CEO of ULI Europe, that density led to better risk-adjusted returns for real estate, as well as positive social environment impact. Grove, another senior analyst there, pointed out that density is more than just being about the number of people living or working in a defined area, but it's about the right kind of density for cities that matters. So COVID-19 crisis in 2021, where are we? Well, I'm working on a big project which is funded by the Medical Research Council, looking at non-communicable diseases. Obviously, we now know that COVID and communicable diseases are very interrelated with non-communicable diseases, in that there's very much social inequality around both of those. And different cities that we've been looking at in this project are showing that inequity very strongly. So nevertheless, most of the data that we've been collecting so far is on the non-communicable diseases. And of course, the real estate industry, in terms of developers and also investors, are involved in creating wellness where it exists. So here we see a flight to quality. It was already happening with the wellness mattering, but it's been accelerated. So different questions here. Is world business still in one place, particularly in each global market? Are we in new financial times? Are we seeing the death of physical real estate offices? Are we seeing the death of physical retail? Well, we've been interviewing the large investment brokers, the agencies, real estate agencies, the investment banks and the REITs, real estate investment trusts. And what we find is that wellness is at the top of the agenda and it's user demand led. So what are we seeing? We're seeing a return to the office with hybrid working, with work from home. It seems like Class A property will be unaffected by some of the recession in office investment. Demise of physical retailing with retail with repurposing to mixed use and buy-to-let residential market, including social housing. But what we're tending to see in terms of the nuanced kind of investment flows are investment flows into flexible office space and use, high quality design, collaborative space in offices, work from home offices in the home, and a highlight on indoor air quality and healthy urban realm, that particularly air quality outside the office or the house. And this is just a few slides at the end to tail off, just to show you some of the work that we're doing, looking into how we can use a behavioural approach to build that wellness into real estate investment and development in cities around the world. This is the work of my research assistant, who unfortunately isn't here today, but hopefully you'll be able to have a look at some of these sources to see exactly what we're doing on this. but basically it's agent-based modeling using NetLogo, which is a widely used platform for that modeling. This is one of the figures created by my research assistant. And here we can see that conceptually what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at changes in the macro behavioral environment of users and also real estate investors and developers, how that will relate to particular land parcels and how residents using that space will also change their behaviours. So the potential scenarios for urban land use change will be examined through that modelling, and we will be able to see to what extent the changes, the behavioural changes on the part of the investors, the developers and the policymakers, and also the users of that city space will be leading to more of a pro-health urban environment. So that's the end of my presentation. You've got a couple of email addresses there, one of them being mine and the other Rain Kwon, she's Hezio Rain Kwon, who's my research assistant, who's the expert on that agent-based modelling. And I'm going to stop there and hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Professor Payne. And our next speaker is Mr. Mahir Mermer, the National Director of JLL Turkey Real Estate Consulting. He will be talking about a very important subject that maybe we are going to discuss it in the upcoming years, changing office space demands after the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Mermer?
Önder Bey, would you mind if I continue in Turkish?
Yes, you can.
Yes, perfect. I will show you the how is office market after the pandemic, but I will continue in Turkish after that. So now I am sharing my screen. Oh, can you see it?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect.
We are going to focus on the Turkish and Istanbul office market. All of the offices are generally centered in Istanbul. All of the developments in Istanbul are reflecting and mirroring the changes all around the world. So it is going in parallel, mainly focusing on Istanbul office market, and we will be looking at the trends in the Istanbul office market. What we are trying to show here and the figures we are trying to show is reflecting the figures of Istanbul office market since 2007 and how we have been impacted. And in COVID-19, $42, and red line is showing the dollar basis and renting prices. And the highest is 42 and declining to 26, and we see a recovery phase. And of course, all of these Russian crises and all of the military attempts have declined to $25. And when we look at on the annual basis, there is an also decline trend, and we can measure it with the economical fluctuation on actually annual basis. What is the rental rates, and it is showing its reflection with the pandemic. There is a decline of meter square in rental places, in rental market, and of course we are learning slightly the relative results by our present time, because many offices have died, have passed away is the general statement. But with the pandemic, the office environment has not actually died, but they are changing and transforming their forms and styles. What happened with pandemic? In Turkey, in the beginning of 2000s, we have seen the first cases in 2020. We have started to work at home, and many renting people have started to question themselves whether we will be renewing our contracts or not. They have started to check their office places and also question the idea of renting it. And we do have a 30% of density in office usage, and many human resources departments are asking 30% of their employees to come and work at the office. So a new model, a hybrid model is being developed. And by 2021, we see a reduction in office places and spaces. And when we look at the last quarter, there is a demand in a number of the renting actually side. And when we check the situation, the rents and rental prices are declining at some certain buildings, but in some certain buildings it's increasing. A plus type of, for example, buildings are rising in price. And if they're in the good location, the demand is increasing in these good located places. And Izmir earthquake has got an impact, for example. One of the major reasons is many buildings are really do not answer the criteria of A plus type of buildings. The pandemic, clean air and clean working environment has become very important. Opening windows have gained importance. And the buildings who provide those features, of course, created a willingness for some certain companies to move their offices. And of course, we do have a very actually hybrid style, and half from home and half from office or remote working style have gained the ground. And so this is the common point that we observe. In the near future, we are going to hear these hybrid systems moreover than any time else. And what happened during the pandemic? We see some downsizing, and they have downsized their offices in Istanbul, some global camps. Or Vodafone-like companies closed their operational offices, and they have moved to actually house offices or home offices, or they have had with call set operations, and with the other IT operations were able to be operated from distance. And they have observed and experienced this. And majority of the companies are downsizing the amount of their offices. I don't know whether this will be stabilized, this will be a fixed reality or not, but 50% of actually distribution and reduction and downsizing is just the reality of today. We need to look ahead to see the real facts and figures. This is an example, a template actually. When you have got a 10,000 square meter of an area headquarter, they are downsizing it to 5,000 square meter. And of course, they are also establishing satellite offices. If they are in the European side or if they're at the Asian side of Istanbul, they're having satellite offices. We have seen that the traffic jam, spending your time in traffic jam, going 2 hours in the traffic jam and returning back in 2 hours of time, really a waste of time and waste of energy. Instead of that, they have hired and rented some spaces, satellite offices and flexible office areas, not to make time to travel long distances and long times. And they would like to do it for the actually international office. Working from home is not something very sustainable. As you all know it very well, the home environment cannot be suitable if you have children, for example. The working condition and meeting condition have had challenging times. And psychologically, we would like to go out and they would like to socialize with people. So offices will not pass away, will not die indeed. And with the pandemic, what has changed? In the past, we were having high-heeled buildings when we were thinking about office, and still we do have such kind of buildings. But the general demand is having low-story buildings and owning offices and making making use of less elevator. And openable windows really gained a great importance. And despite the fact that for the pandemic, whether it is important or not, but A plus buildings are, when they take preventive measures, they are creating a comfort and they are creating a certain level of air quality. But many of the companies are looking for openable windows, and they're looking for the offices which do have balcony and terrace. And multi-story buildings are not having openable windows, and they don't have any balcony. And such kind of buildings sometimes are having loss of demand. And of course, public transportation is actually another issue. Neither of the offices, actually, neither of the employees would like to use more than one or more than two public transportation when they're going to office spaces. And of course, flexible offices and demand on flexible offices are increasing in number. We all know it very well. What is this flex office type? I would like to tell you that. Let's suppose that we do have a company and they would like to rent an office. What were they doing? They were going and renting a place at a building. For example, Coca-Cola, they were going and renting a space. And many people are doing it as follows. They are having a actually agreement with a network company, and they are selecting a region. In that region, the owners These flex offices are renting the places. What does it provide? During the pandemic, we have seen that actually the companies are having big spaces and they would like to reduce and downsize it. They are paying hundreds of liras. When everything is going fine, they are being in need of opening new spaces. Very hard to rent it, taking the decision and applying, and also integrating it to their present system, and also operating the rental contract is taking really time. These flex offices with this actually landlords and office buildings actually are being carried out by these tenant companies. Let me give an example. For example, in Turkey and in global market, there are some flex office examples. The biggest feature of flex office is, for example, you have a center in Levant, maybe in Ataşehir or in some other regions or in some other cities of Turkey, you may have office places. Or if you're a foreign company, for example, you can also have a working space on abroad on temporary basis or on fixed basis. So it's a very flexible solution. And with the pandemic, it was in our agenda before the pandemic. With pandemic, what we would be experiencing within 5 years have been in a shorter period of time. In the next 2 years, these type of companies and office places will be reaching to the flexible structures and restructure themselves with a flexible manner. We are speaking about flexible working hours and the importance of flexible working actually style. So it is essential to have flexible offices. And in EMEA region, we have seen that the number of tables per 100 staff is now giving 72 actually tables. Before the pandemic was 91, and I believe that this is going to be reduced in the near future. 100 people will not have 100 tables at the same time. Some of the people will be standing on their foot, and the major reason is, of course, extending the social spaces. And before the pandemic, the more people you fit in inside the office, it will be more effective. They would be renting less space. And during the pandemic, that 20 meters square have reached to 1 person per person. And of course, in the post-COVID period, it will be 14.4 square meter. When we compare it with the previous times, it will be more comfortable and it will be a broader space. And one of the reasons is 1990s, we do have cubicle type of working environments, very boring, and they don't have any socializing environment, and it was very limited. In 2019, these spaces have reached up to 40%, and after the pandemic, the working spaces have transformed into social areas, 70% social areas. The major reason for that is companies are, when they're working from remote distances, they have started to understand that the liability of people have reduced, have been declined, and to create actually loyalty of their employees, they are going to create such kind of social space with design and decision-taking process. It is going to take a while. I'm always giving examples from maybe actually these kinds of spaces, but people would like to work and would like to socialize, and they would like to be more creative. And this is has been actually integrated in our life by the help of pandemic. And our, of course, business clothes and dress code have changed. In the 1990s, we were obliged to wear ties, and we were obliged to, of course, have certain dress codes, and by 2020s, 2021 and 2022s, after pandemic, the working clothes have started to change. And in 25 years, wearing a suit will be up to you. Most probably not will be a dress code anymore. And also technology-related issues are also appearing. Actually, remote working systems have taken away the cables away, and also we do have no more cables, and we don't have any fixed screens, and we don't have raised floors, and even laptops will not be at the office. It will be a totally digital environment to work in, and so we will be having server rooms maybe. And 5G technology, after 5G technology all around the world, even the space age environments, working environments will be awaiting us. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Erkan Sümer, Deputy General Manager of Harmoni Real Estate and Consulting. Mr. Sümer will be, as an experienced real estate appraiser, Mr. Sümer will focus on the impact of COVID-19 on the value of different real estate assets categories like housing, office, retail, tourism, and industry. Mr. Sümer.
Thank you for introduction. I will also keep going on Turkish. müsaadenizle.
I have a slide to share. As you all know it very well, COVID-19 have had an impact in many sectors, and today we are speaking about the real estate sector. In our country, in the last 1.5 years, our agenda is basing on the increasing actual rental fees. And COVID has got an impact, but other than COVID, we have had some economical developments. We should not ignore this fact, and we need to differentiate that. A lot of real estate types may be mentioned here, but housing, office, spaces, which Mahir Bey emphasized, and also shops, and also industrial storage facilities, touristic facilities. What will be the sales values? What will be the rental values? I will focus on that. And there is a certain situation about housing. In 2019 and in the actually 2020's March, we have started to face with the reality of pandemic. The housing prices were increasing very much, and in the actually news they were mentioning it as the head title, and COVID has got an impact, but there are main practical reasons for that. Of course, in the last year, in the month of May, we have had the state banks the discount of interest rates, let's say, for the housing activities, housing investments. It was 8%, it was 9% of a debting amount which we will have. And for our actually investors and also the ones who would like to invest in housing or for accommodation, they wanted to buy new houses. And this interest discount, as soon as they have announced this campaign, we have seen an increase of 20 to 25% of an increase. And of course, the sales operations have taken place. And 700, when you were buying a house for 600,000 liras, you have started to buy it for 720, 800,000 liras. Of course, forex changes and stabilized condition, and also the real estate developers actually the situation and not foreseeing the future, of course, have had a delay in the field of actually demand side. On the supply side, the demand was very high numbers. However, the supply was not very high. And the third situation was during the discount in interest rates, and the people, the investors who were buying houses from high prices, in order to have a return in rental fees, they have increased the rental amounts, rental fees. They have just increased their present, actually, prices, or they have replaced the people who were living in their houses, and of course they were paying a certain level of rent, and since that reason people have started to think whether to take leasing from mortgage credit from the bank and buying their houses instead of paying high rental fees or not. So these three triggering forces have really imposed the situation. And the fourth criteria and impact reason can be the university students. We were having a distance education in the previous years, but this year we have started a face-to-face education. So we have seen a demand from the actually university students. The actually quota of the universities has not increased, but there was a bottleneck situation on the supply side, and there was an increase with the additional university student side on the demand side. And all of a sudden the actually housing index and the global housing index have shown a shift. As you see, a rising trend. There isn't any recession. However, 10% and 67% of the situation is being on the time where there was a reduction discount in interest rates. As soon as the interest rates are going up, the price index in housing is not going down. It is still rising. It's in the rising trend. For 2 months, And they have carried on a campaign for the interest rates, but they have duplicated the interest rates, which is 17%, 18% right now, have not declined the price index of housing. It has been the triggering force, and the present situation has been an outcome of this process. Since we are in MARUF, I would like to focus on Mermer region and neighborhood housing prices. Since 2019, when we look at the prices, all of the sub-regions are moving in parallel with each other. The only striking point is Balıkesir and Çankaya region. Purple line is having a actually more rising trend than anything else, any other region, because there are some construction projects like Izmir, for example, Autoway, make the distance between Istanbul and Izmir shorter. Balıkesir and Çankaya are very close to Marmara region, and the majority of the population is not living. It's a traveling. It's a actually summertime place for those Marmara region people. Both the age group and also the middle-aged group have started to migrate due to pandemic reasons to these regions, and there was an increase in summer house demands since people were living in metropole cities like Istanbul. You are not able to have garden experience. For this reason, people have started to seek for houses with gardens, and also these regions are, of course, big cities, but the housing demand is not very high in number. They do have a certain balance. As long as the demand is increasing, of course, the prices have started to rise in these regions. When we look at here, within a 1.5-year period of time, according to Turkish Statistic Institute's data, there is an increase of 70% in the last 10 years. We have not experienced such kind of a situation severely, but in Balıkesir and Çankaya, the average ratio is approximately more than 85%. Last year, when it was 100,000, now it is 180,000. This is a very serious situation. We're all discussing and speaking about it. Our procurement power is getting low, but in order to combat with this situation, in order to bring this rising trend down, we need to develop new actually housing projects. And economical environment will be becoming better, and the demand will be increasing. And of course, but as equal as this, we will be having enough supply, equal supply. A few years ago, such kind of situations were presenting us a different picture. We were speaking about actually housing balloons. There was a huge level of supply, but the demand was not that much high. It is essential to state that this housing price index is showing any type of housing. With the pandemic, we have been locked down, and we were in need of green, we were in need of fresh air. When we make an order, according to the Housing Times, majorly the periphery actually houses have gained a great importance, and the houses with landscapes, with green areas, which are having their closed circuit systems are having higher demand. And apartments are having less demand. When we put an order, we may rank it like this. In the new era, new type of architectures will gain priority in this ranking. And our actually architectures and our landscape designers and environmental engineers know it better than me. But I would like to make a comment. In the past, our moms were having big living rooms, and we were not able to go inside the living rooms because it was for our guests. And a new generation left it aside, and all of a sudden we have come across with COVID and lockdown. And we have started to understand that balconies are vitally important in our life. And you can see a lot of houses, new houses, which do not have a balcony, but with the pandemic, we were in need of balconies, and we have got a working room right now, home office rooms. We were having an extra room. During the pandemic, it becomes something necessary. And if you are working at home, it is essential to have a working room, study room. And when we were thinking at some certain meter squares, I believe that we will be having bigger meter squares from now on. And when we focus on office, Mahir Bey spoke about the details. I don't want to repeat myself, so I would like to skip this part. And actually, distance working, remote working models are the hybrid models. We have come across with that a little bit late, whether it is going to kill our efficiency and lower our productivity or not. We love to be together with our employees. This is something we would like to socialize. This is something characteristic. But during the pandemic, we worked from distance. And also, the employers have noticed that this is not something unproductive. They were obliged to discover this, but we work from actually distance. You don't have a lower level of productivity, and operational costs have also lowered. They didn't have any service actually costs, and electrical costs have also declined. So the profitability rate of some certain enterprises have also increased. Both local and international enterprises in Turkey are questioning themselves what type of working trend they will follow. They are discussing that. I never heard that we are fully going to return back to our offices. Even the COVID will be over. They are focusing on hybrid models. How many days we will be at office, how many days we will be at home. They are discussing that. The offices that we are dreaming about are going to shift, are going to transform. Mahir Bey emphasized that point. But in the short term, there will be more empty spaces, so there will be a decline in the rental fees of the offices. And this is the present trend. Near future, maybe a few years later, there may be some alternatives for office areas. There are very good startup projects, and the new sharing office types are the new trends. Maybe architecturally, some of the offices will be transformed. Their functions will change on building basis. We will see the result within a few years. This is what I assume. In retailing and shopping sector, we do have, of course, the major impacts. We have seen major impacts. Housing has got a rising trend. However, in the retailing and shopping sector, we are seeing a declining trend. We do have the shopping mall retailing shops, and we do have the street retailing shops. In shopping malls, in long term, they were all closed, actually. They didn't accept any visitors, any customers. And shopping malls have presented some options to their actually, like rental discounts, and sometimes they have emptied their spaces. And many of the shops are the chain shops. So they do have an e-commerce site. And since they do have the e-commerce site, those brands and shops income level did not imbalance. Whatever they could not sell in their shops have started to be sold on internet. Since everybody was at home, they were not able to go out. So their consumption needs were less from the shops. And actually, shopping mall tenants have not affected a lot. And they did not have the effect as much as the actually street retailers, because they were having packaging services, but they were working in a limited hour. The street retailers I'm speaking about, and we see some bankruptcy. They were not able to pay their rental fees, and there is a decline in the rental fee values. But this is not something actually permanent. This is something temporary, and as soon as we recover from actually COVID and the circulation starts, the actually rental fees will be reaching up to its old fashion. And when we look at industry side, when we look at the storaging side, of course, e-commerce have shown a rising trend, and they were in need of more storaging spaces. E-commerce companies and producers were in need of additional actually spaces, and of course this has triggered the demand. And when it happened like that, the actually supply sites value and the factories value have increased. We were in need of new type of productions like the glow, disinfectants, and cologne, and masks were in life. And with COVID's actually production opportunities, we were in need of new facilities, new factories. With the increase in demand, of course, the values have also increased. When we come to the level of tourism, the major sector which was having an impact, which has got major impact, and there are 64 events which has triggered the tourism sector. Some of them are global, some of them are local. And there are 6 titles that we can collect: economy, security, health, natural disasters, political, and organizational. When we made a survey with professionals from the sector, Professor Cemal Öz from Istanbul University carried out this survey. We have seen that major factors affected tourism was security issues, terrorist issues, economical and health issues. COVID is affecting tourism, but we should not forget that there are 64 events, and tourism is used to such kind of pandemic and actually events, and they're able to operate and manage their burden. And during the close times, they have used that time for renovation and maintenance, and they have made use of this time very with an opportunistic point of view. Of course, their turnovers have shown a decline, but neither of the hotel owners were complaining and selling their real estate because of not having any customer. And of course, real estate in the scope of tourism was like this. In order to show a general picture, when you consider the rental fee, the rental value, and the sales value, there is an increase on both sides. We don't know whether the impact source is the COVID or not. And of course, office places do have higher level of actually decline when we compare it with touristic facilities. And of course, as I have told, retailing, actually buildings, facilities were seeing this impact as a temporary process, as a temporary period. So they did not have any decline, they did not have any rise in their renting values and sales values. On the industrial side, we didn't have a significant change, but the sales rates have shown some increase. And tourism, it is similar to retailing business. Tourism was interpreting this situation as something temporary. The tourists who have not come this year will be most probably exploding next year, and despite the fact they do have a decline in their sales, their actually economical condition is at a stabilized level. That's all I would like to say about. And I'm ending my sharing. Thank you very much.
Well, and for the last talk, we will continue with Professor Ali Türel from Çankaya University. He will be sharing his presentation about building production in Turkey under the effects of the pandemic. Professor Türel.
Thank you. Now I have to present my presentation. I prepare twice a year together with the Eastern European Construction Forecasting Association. The building construction, the progress in construction and forecast for the next 3 years. In Turkey, I prepare in Turkey, and my colleagues prepare for other 7 Eastern European countries, Russia, Turkey, Ukraine, and so on. So Russia and Turkey produce more housing than the rest of the Europe, for example. In Turkey is the leading housing producer in Europe in terms of meter square floor area. In other construction activities, Turkey's progress was quite important. Now I'll explain. I can have how I can move to. Sorry. Sorry. The Turkish economy and building construction have been much affected from the COVID-19 pandemic following the days of the first positive COVID-19 test on the 11th of March 2020. The government had to introduce a series of precautionary measures from mid-March onwards. Great falls in industrial production, including completed building construction and in gross domestic product, occurred during the following months of 2020. When the pandemic problem started in the first half of the 2020, the economy and the construction sector were recovering from the crisis that occurred because of an exchange rate crisis in the second half of 2018. Sharp falls in the value of Turkish lira caused big rises in construction costs and decreases in building construction in 2019. Yearly figures show that building starts for all sectors continue to grow between 2019 and 2020, whereas housing completions have been falling since 2018, although there is a big backlog of construction in every sector. Now, I present this in a diagram from 2019 onwards. Now, the upper part, the blue, is construction permits, number of meter square of floor areas, total floor areas within a year. In 2017, we had a peak, historical peak, 1.4 million dwelling units started to be built in that year when our population growth was less than 1 million, 980 million. So, great increase. On the other hand, completions, occupancy permits have been increasing until 2018 and less fluctuations. Volatility is less in that sense. And then it has been decreasing up to 2020. Lifting most of the precautionary measures and introducing a subsidy policy that includes offering consumer and mortgage loans under market interest rates by the three state-owned banks on 1st June 2020 served as an important stimulus for the economy and for the construction sector. My other colleagues explained this before me. Erkan, Sümer, I think, talked more on this issue. After the incentives were introduced, great increases occurred. 55.4% of total sales were by using mortgage credits. And historical peaks in sales occurred first in June and then in July in Turkey. The July historical peak was the highest one. In order to see the volume of building construction during the pandemic, 6 monthly building starts and completions between the second half of 2018 and first half of 2020 are presented in the following diagram. Now, these are the starts and completions, meter square floor areas in 6 monthly period in order to see the effect of the pandemic. 2018 was not a crisis year, but inevitable fall from the very high 2017 starts occurred. Then 2019 was the crisis year. The very low starts occurred. Then building construction began to increase up to 2020, second half of 2020. Then 1% decrease occurred 2021. Completions, on the other hand, have been falling down up to 2021, which is the pandemic period. This is the pandemic month, 2020, pandemic 6 months, the beginning of the pandemic. And then an increase occurred, then began to fall in the following month, following 6 months. 6 months of construction and occupancy permits for housing and 5 groups of groups of sectors are presented in the following 3 diagrams. Now, housing. Construction permits came down to a very low level in the first half of 2019, then began to increase up to 2020, and then some 1% decrease in the first 6 months of this year. But construction occupancy permits have been more less volatile moves, but after 2020, the second half of 2020, there has been some decrease. In the last 3 years, the number of completed dwelling units were around 600,000, 700,000, 800,000. So on the average, about 700,000 per year. Our housing need is on the basis of number of newly formed households is around 700,000 dwelling units. And so we produce nearly equal amount of housing during these 3 years. But my colleagues explain the reasons of very recent crisis in Turkey. I don't have time to talk on this anymore. Now, 6-month construction permits for certain sectors. Now, the highest growth is construction permits in industry. But this is about 60% of the total industrial construction in Turkey because housing starts, industrial and warehousing starts and completions within the boundaries of organized industrial districts are not reflected in this diagram. So in these statistics. So we have much more industrial growth than others. Then this one, this falling diagram is in schools, education, health, and recreation areas. The importance of the government investments made those investments, brought this investment to lower level. These two parallel diagrams are for office buildings and hotel buildings. So these two sectors have the output in these two sectors, industrial output in this, construction output in these two sectors have decreased in 2018, even before. So they did not show much difference. And but after this 2020, the first half of 2020, the levels, except the industry, of these sectors starts are lower than their starts before that time. Now, completions. These are completions. Completions, industrial warehousing completions were not so high. So, but in all sectors, the lower output after 2020, the first half of 2020, which is the start of the pandemic, is less than before. So there is an obvious effect of the pandemic on the output. Less building completions than starts in the first half of 2020 can be related to high mortgage interest rates and decreasing demand under the effects of the pandemic. Another factor is great increase in the construction cost. Annual rise in July was in the construction cost was 44.76%, 45%. It was 25.81 percentage point above the rate of change in consumer price index. So real rate is close to 20, over 20%. So in the previous 12 months, construction cost rose by 9% when inflation was 11%. So before the pandemic started, the construction cost was quite low, much lower, even after the 2019 crisis. But now it is terrible, nearly 45%. Now this is the annual change of the construction cost. This is annual rate of change in each month of these years after the start of the pandemic. Pandemic started in the third month of 2020. It was decreasing at that time. then sharp rise. Why such a rise? Because foreign exchange, the value of foreign exchange increased and the value of Turkish lira decreased sharply at similar rates. So we realized that the Turkish construction sector, Turkish construction materials producing sector are very much related to the international capital flows and especially the rate of change in Turkish lira. Housing price index increased by 31% in July 2020 from the same month of 2020. Now, this is the housing price index. Erkan Sümer also mentioned about this. So it was 2020, it was 120, now 185 or so. So there is a increase in housing price index. In real rate, this red one is the nominal rates and the black is the real rate. Real rate is very high here, and then housing it was 13 and 76 percentage point less than the rise in the construction cost. So this is a very important point. Now, building construction cost increased by nearly 45%, and housing prices, for example, there is not too much difference between civil engineering, housing price, and so on, especially all other building types. So there is almost 14% difference between the price rise and construction cost rise. So much lower rate of increase in housing prices, including of new homes, may create unfavorable conditions for house builders, may lead to less housing production in the short and medium terms unless new policies are introduced by the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Türel. That was a very interesting presentation as well. We have more than 25 minutes for the Q&A session. If any of our, listeners and audience, listeners from the audience want to ask a question to our colleagues. Anyone? Or maybe we can expect some questions later. Maybe I can ask a question to all audience. First, there were these reports before, in the middle of the pandemic, that we will return to a sort of a normal life at the end of the last quarter of 2021. However, there was this, game changer, which was the Delta variant. My question is to Mr. Mahir Mermer and Erkan Sümer. Is the real estate sector, just you were talking about, are considering these unexpected changes, unexpected, behavior of the virus, because we don't know what it's going to do, right? So, right now we are dealing with Delta variant, and everything is, start postponing. And I don't know whether the industry is aware of these, unexpected, behavior of the virus and the epidemic or whatever it is. So.
Let me summarize it in English as well. In the last quarter of 2021, in the reports about going back to life, is actually postponed. So maybe we can expect some different variations of Delta virus. But maybe, I don't know if the industry is responsive to some developments and recent developments and accordingly, but we had the same expectations on that, especially in the tourism sector. In the other sectors as well. So is it founded on some positive expectations? What kind of positive expectations do we have here? I think we need to be used to be living with our masks. So I think the life will continue as what it is to look like. We'll know less, but what we need to do is to look forward, and maybe we'll continue working from our homes. So I think people are trying to get used to the living standards that we have today with COVID-19. But in COVID, of course, we had many plans. We didn't know what would happen. But people has just turned to normal. But I think it will affect the years ahead of us only. But I think the effects will continue because of the industry. But some office solutions came up. Some companies work from home. Like, so 50% of the employees will work from home, then the other one will not. In shopping malls, it's everything is okay. And people haven't spent so much money in the COVID time, so everything might happen. So after the COVID, people had a tendency to spend more. What we observe is that everything is going well after the COVID-19, especially in the last quarter. So in terms of commerce and logistics, and everything seems all right. So what we need to do is to get used to it and try to live with this. So I think with Delta we had different expectations and implications, and our real estate solutions should also be used to this. So maybe we will be thinking about the fifth generation shopping malls, or because people do not want to be under the closed indoors. Thank you. I really agree, Mr. Mahir. It's not that easy to look forward and to foresee the future, but I think our habits have changed. Our life has changed. Even COVID is over, we would see that most of our habits have changed. So, for example, I do not go shopping. I also am more interested in e-commerce. I just order, and my order comes at my door. So it doesn't matter what variant it is, but I think we will be reconstructing the environment of real estate environment. So the change in the 5 or 10 years have changed, but the prices also changed. We see some households, and the price of housing has changed and rose a lot. Maybe we'll consider the concept of housing differently in future. Maybe we will want to go outside of the circle. You know, there's a white collar living in the outskirts of Istanbul. They had a problem of going to the office back then, but now they can work from their home. And so from my experiences, I think living close to the city center would also be really great for me too, because I wouldn't have any traffic problem, and I will be eager to spend time in the commute. So this is what I would like to say. Thank you very much. It was really insightful comments.
have to mention related to the relationship. In fact, the amount of output which are the construction output which is produced and which will be produced in the following years is that in Turkey there is a in almost every sector except wholesale and real estate trade sector, there is a huge backlog of buildings under construction. For example, there are about 2.9 million dwelling units are under construction. There are about 30 million meters square of office buildings are under construction. There is a similarly, for example, office hotel buildings. I think around, if I remember correctly, 15 million meters square of office hotel buildings under construction. So we talk about the starts as an indication of supply and completions as an indication of demand. So I think there is now less demand. In fact, there has been since a long time. So since I write twice a year, the construction sector and the whole world industry construction sector can reach to those reports. So I have been mentioning since a long time that there is a huge backlog of construction, and we cannot explain why this huge backlog of construction and so a lot of money, sunk capital, that we call, is there, and it is not completed. I checked with the Turkish Statistical Institute whether these statistics are correct. They said yes, because they renew those after 5 years if the buildings are not completed. So we have a huge backlog of buildings under construction, and so the starts completions relations are not very important because there is already sufficient amount of construction except in trade buildings that can be completed in a very short period of time. So we will see what will happen in the future about those huge backlog of construction.
Okay, but thank you, Professor.
Also, I think Erkan Sümer mentioned about the changing type of demand, the changing preferences of people, especially during the pandemic, may be an important factor. So this changing because nowadays, for example, summer houses, summer cottages, there is a very huge demand for summer cottages, and their prices increase very much. So, and also houses with gardens, because, for example, in an apartment flat, people had to stay for three weeks without being able to go out and to walk and so on. So the new type of demand has emerged under these conditions. Of course, another point is just one point.
Your last comment.
Just finishing. Pandemics normally ends in 2 years. So we are approaching to the second year. Whether it will end and we will come back to our earlier life, or it will continue and we will live a new life after that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor. Professor Payne, I think you have a comment.
So I agree with the speaker who talked about the new normal. So the research that I'm doing for the UK Medical Research Council, I've been interviewing, as I said in my presentation, the big global investment banks in real estate, the big global real estate agencies who are brokers for deals, and the real estate investment trusts and funds. And they are part of global networks, obviously the ones that I'm interviewing. So they've got offices all around the world in the global cities anyway. And what I'm hearing from them is that this new normal in terms of behaviours is on the part of property users, whether it's residential or whether it's to do with retail use or whether it's office use, and also on the part of the investment industry. And of course, that affects the development industry in terms of what the demand is and where the finance capital is coming from. So what we actually have at the moment is a mismatch between the physical infrastructure. Some of that's around where it is located, and some of it's around the kind of physical infrastructure. A mismatch between that and the new kind of behaviours which we're seeing from the property users and the investors. So I just thought you might be interested to know that in the UK, the government under Boris Johnson has now introduced to residential, including social housing, and we're beginning with it. So I think there are some issues about it, because if you don't need planning permission, there are questions about what will happen to the standard of the property and also to the urban realm, both of which are very important for wellness. So that's just an insight into a policy change in the UK, which would, in theory, it would help the infrastructure to adapt to the behavioural shifts that we're seeing. But I certainly think those shifts towards wellness recognition are there to stay, even though, as we've said before, the new variants and what's going to come next, we don't know. But I think that shift is very much seen in the real estate industry as one that's not going to go away.
So thank you. So we may expect lots of policy changes and new legislations from the governments as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly in terms of the UK, it's happening already.
Yeah. And we have a question, though. Just a question, maybe I should translate. Many of global metropolises were developed with these skyscrapers with their own images for this connection. The question is, these metropolises were developed with these big skyscrapers, which is, the technology is profound and their images are very visible on the, global for the urban landscape. After the pandemic, are they going to lose their, importance, their impact in the built environment? So this is the question. If you have comments.
I think one factor, may I say a few words?
Please.
I think from the government and from the president, there was a comment on high-rise buildings. So since a few years, municipalities were discouraged to let building high-rise buildings within their boundaries. So they try to keep up to 5 stories maximum in most cases. But in commercial areas, for office buildings, I don't think that there is that much difference. But the speakers mentioned about the problems in office building, office use, and the problems in office building investments, considering the working from home and using office less. So whether there will be sufficient demand for 15-story of office buildings during the pandemic, and when the pandemic will end. So I think on the one hand, there is an administrative concern about high rise. On the other hand, there is a effect of the demand for office buildings, office use. So this is why. But there is building high rise residential buildings. Residential buildings are discouraged now in Turkey.
Okay, thank you. Professor Payne?
Yes, well, in terms of the interviews again that I've been doing, what I've heard from certainly one US investment bank, so that's real estate investment that they're doing, is that there is a move towards investing in lower rise. because that kind of building design better meets the wellness expectations of office tenants. Having said that, I'm also hearing that the Class A real estate market locations are likely to be resilient because location and address and being close to your other main competitors and collaborators matters. So I think going forward, it'll be more like redesign of existing buildings, which is already happening, but I think will happen more. So I think that will be the trend. But of course, in terms of high rise, and I showed that first image in my slides, which was actually, I actually bought from the Financial Times the right to use an adapted logo for that image in one of my publications. But in that, writing with an architect, we were very much talking about that kind of cityscape as really being about a very competitive territorial form of city branding. So one global city competing with another. And therefore the kind of homogenization of these cities, because they all had very similar looking architect buildings. So I think that's the sort of political angle on high rise. But I think that may have to take a softer approach in relation to what users want and perhaps what investors want to invest in.
Thank you so much. Başka yorum var mıdır soruyla ilgili olarak? Any other comments from
Önder Bey. Now, during the pandemic, we see lack of demand for the office building, especially for the high-rise office building. But after that, now we are seeing less of demands for it. But if the office buildings, it is high-rise or low-rise building, if they provide the pandemic conditions, if they provide the really A-class office buildings, now we are seeing increasing demand for that kind of building. So in the future time, we will see that the office building shape will be changed. I don't think we will see a new high-rise office building in the Istanbul market. Not I'm talking about New York or London, because the shape's changing according to tenant demands. Now there is a lot of multinational companies that they are choosing low-rise building because they don't want to use the elevators. They want to reach their floors very easily, without using any elevators or something like that. So now we are seeing the low-rise buildings getting more popular in the market. But office market is definitely related to the economic conditions. If the economy is going well, we see less of demand for the office buildings. So in the future time, I am pretty sure that the office shape will change because you will see more social areas in the office floors. So we don't see tables, chairs, just computers. You will see less of social areas, which means the developers have to change shape of the new office buildings in the future time.
Thank you so much for your comments. I think we have lost 5 minutes. Maybe we can conclude with your, if any, comments that you have about the subject.
May I say if
yes,
works,
please, Professor. Please, Professor. Yes.
I think first of all, one point which I mentioned, rising construction costs at much higher rate than sale prices requires that landowners should earn less money. Now, otherwise, builders do not have available resources to pay without making any profit. So, but in planning as well. Now, I am a city planner, and I am teaching city planning and also housing economics and so on. So now, planners, as planners, we have to prepare plans with more greenery, both in the community, and also within the house, within the land area of the house as well. So and probably landowners would be content with less earnings than before under these new conditions. So they have to give up some of their incomes. Because we are as planners and as users of urban land, we are in Turkey especially, I am sure in other countries as well, we are very much under the pressure of landowners. So they dictate the height, the building conditions, and so on. So, building bylaws, for example. For the High Court, I wrote some years ago 104 pages report on the request about very much increased building by law, building conditions, building the use of land for building. So we should have a new approach: more green area, more land, less build-up area. I hope we will succeed for this endeavor.
So thank you. Just I think we may expect to see more value on the sustainability of the environment. Before the pandemic, we knew that. I think just during and after the pandemic, those will be more important issues in terms of architectural design, real estate, business, and urban planning, so on. So I think this concludes our session. We have 2 minutes, and on behalf of the organizers and myself, I thank our colleagues for their really interesting presentations and remarks. And thank you for everyone joined us today. So thank you.
Very much for all contributors.